Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Anthony Hardy, aka the Camden Ripper. We're going to London, baby. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! As you can probably guess from the title of the video, we are going to Camden, London. London town. I'm excited to be here today, so do excuse me if I am spicy. Can't help it, got so much energy. I really have. I'll chat to you at the end. Let's get on with the story. So control yourself. So on the 30th of December in 2002, a homeless man was looking for food, sadly, in bins around this area. And he discovered, well, it would certainly put him off eating, 2 bin bags. One bin bag, when he opened it, contained 2 calf muscles, human, and the torso of a female. I believe he took the bags with the body parts in, bless him, to a local hospital to share that gruesome discovery. And then the police were called and they sent investigators to this bin where he'd found these body parts. And very quickly that just became like a heaving crime scene. The Met Police then started a murder investigation, and forensics were then on the scene at this bin, which was really difficult. It was a hard task because there's a lot of foot traffic to a bin. It was a communal, like those big, I'll share a picture, but like, you know, a big communal area of bins. So that's, just gross anyway, let alone body parts, and a lot of people in and out of that area. They started by interviewing people that lived in the flats that the communal bin belonged to, and that was over 100 flats. I'll share a picture of that too. So it was like an estate of flats in London. The investigators then got in a specialist search team to start searching the area, and they sort of started at the bins and went out. And less than 250 metres away from the initial site of the bin, they would make another gruesome discovery. Can you guess? These body parts were discovered in Plender Street, and all of the body parts from both of the sites were then sent off to pathologists to determine if this was one person or what. And it was sadly discovered that they had 2 victims. The police continued their massive door-to-door inquiry situation in all of these flats, and after a while, can you imagine how scary that is? Because at some point, you could then just come face to face with the person that did this. I know that's the point, but scary. Anyway, a name kept coming up. A lot of people in the community mentioned the name Anthony Hardy. His behaviour was a concern to many people. When I researched this case, I couldn't believe how quickly everything unfolded and how the actual investigation seemed to be quite slick. And with this, it felt really slick, really well put together. I liked it. At the same time that all of the house-to-house inquiries are going on, and this guy's name keeps coming up, the police are also looking at CCTV footage from everywhere around these sites. On one CCTV camera near the Plender Street bin, the second site, they find the image or the video of a man in a black Yankees cap, putting a bin liner into the bin where these second lot of body parts were found. Also, the guy was wearing a long black leather style jacket, like Matrix. That's all I could think of when I saw it. Matrix. Nothing Keanu Reeves about him though. They took this CCTV footage and he was identified, the man, as Anthony Hardy. So it's not looking good for this chap. It got worse for Hardy before they even spoke to him, because his flat was smack bang in the middle of these 2 sites where these body parts had been found. So that's not good for you. And they then did some digging into Anthony Hardy's background, and it was colourful to say the least. Just 11 months previously, Anthony Hardy's neighbour had reported him to the police because somebody had poured battery acid through her letterbox. So I think it was a flat near to his flat, and they must have been having dramas and tiffs. And she said, well, I think it's him, because that's who she thought it was. The police came to talk to this lady, and also to then talk to Anthony Hardy. And I really don't think they were expecting to find what they did. They entered his flat and they wanted to search the property, and he agreed to this. They also were interviewing him, questioning him about the battery acid incident through the neighbour's letterbox. And they came across a door that was locked and they couldn't get in, and they were like, well, we need to get into that room. It was a bedroom. And he just said, well, I don't have a key. No. And yeah, okay. It's you just don't use your bedroom then. Good one. Lies. Eventually, they got into this bedroom, and on the bed in this bedroom was the naked, dead body of a woman. What the hell? This is the first part in the case where, I mean, the body parts is enough, but where I'm just baffled. This woman, found dead on the bed in his apartment, that rhymed, sorry, had cuts and scratches to her head, and she had bite marks. Obviously, Hardy was arrested and he was taken into custody. The woman was then identified as 38-year-old Sally Rose White. The pathologist said that she had died from natural causes. It's like he didn't take the context in which she was found into account. He said that she had a heart attack, and I'm not a pathologist. Okay, but right, so she'd had a heart attack. As they looked through her history, they found that she did have some health issues, one of which being heart problems. So maybe not a stretch, but still. The minute a pathologist says that somebody has died from natural causes and that's their cause of death, any murder inquiry is just, well, that's it, it's over. There was no inquiry into her death after that because a pathologist had said that she had died from natural causes, and that was what was put down. Hardy was detained in a psychiatric facility because the battery acid through the door and a dead body in his bedroom, and they needed to evaluate Hardy, and we'll talk more about that later. Having this information about Hardy from literally 11 months ago, the police are keen to speak to him, so they went to his property to question him. And they noted, as they walked towards his flat, there was a not very nice smell. When they entered his property, which, by the way, the front door was left unlocked and open, so they just strolled in. When they entered, they were greeted with a very freaky scene. The walls and hallway and stuff were decorated, shall we say? Picture, not nice things, satanic. And there were drawings on the floor as well, just to make it weirder. Hardy was not in the flat, by the way. He was not there. Can you hear that wind? Freaking me out because I've just talked about satanic things and now it's gale force. It gets weirder. As they entered the living room, I'm going to share some photos as well because I did find some good photos. As they entered the living room, there was a sofa, a table with 3 TVs, and they were hooked up to 3 video players, VHS players. On the dining room table in the lounge were just piles and piles of these VHS videotapes. You can imagine what's on those. Basically, incredibly hardcore yuck porn. And above the bed was a red devil's mask. Really freaky. Just so cliche as well, the whole thing. And there was also a double bed in the living room. It's quite a big room. So a double bed, a sofa, this room was his living space. But there was also a bathroom, a kitchen and a bedroom. So why was his bed in the living room, you ask? Perhaps he didn't want to sleep in the bedroom where Sally had passed away 11 months earlier, maybe. Or perhaps he didn't want to sleep in the bedroom with the rotting female torso that was currently in there. Yeah. When they opened the bedroom door, the officers knew at that point what they were dealing with because I think a lot of them were familiar with that smell, sadly. The smell of a dead body. And as they entered, they noticed an object on the floor, and it was covered quite neatly, actually, with a bin liner, a big one. And on top of that was placed a saw, and on top of that a knife. And when they removed those items, they found the female torso. And that, I believe, is why Matey Boy did not want to sleep in there. At this point, we have painted quite a picture of Anthony Hardy. I just feel like I've called him Stephen at some point. Oh, a mistake. He's Anthony. Why do I feel like that? Never mind, moving on. Anthony. Surprisingly, for this much weirdness, Hardy's life had not always been this freaky. He had graduated university. He had married. He had 4 children. He'd had a decent job and held that down. So what happened and what has got him to this point where there are now dead women being found in his flat on multiple occasions? In 1980, Hardy and his wife and their 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys, moved to Australia. This is when his wife noticed some really significant changes. I mean, significant. It just seems absolutely batshit. Anyway, at one point, and this was the end of their relationship after this, he used a frozen water bottle. So a frozen, water bottle that's been in the freezer. You know what I mean. And he bludgeoned her with it. He beat her around the head with it. And then he dragged her into the bathroom and tried to drown her. I would call that more than a significant change. Would you not? After this, the couple separately moved back to the UK. And this is where Hardy's life just literally spiralled and spiralled out of control. His wife had to file for a restraining order because he just started to stalk her and it wasn't pretty. And he was arrested at some point for breaking that restraining order. He came back to the UK, he had no job and he was homeless, and he also became an alcoholic. So things are just going really downhill. He spent his life going from one hostel to another hostel, and in the 1990s he spent time in psychiatric hospitals where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. And what I find really scary about this case is that before the move to Australia with his family, I couldn't find anything to suggest that there was any cause for concern. His childhood seemed normal. His life up until that point seemed completely normal. What? So he moved to Australia and it did not agree with him, did it? Something just... And then he tries to kill his... It's like he had a psychotic episode. And I guess that does happen. But that's really frightening. That is frightening. I don't like that. Also in the 1990s, his criminal behaviour would begin. So he was arrested and charged for indecent assault, sexual assault, violent behaviour. He was suspected of 3 rapes and arrested, but for some reason, varying reasons, these never went to trial and he was not convicted. A judge at one point cited his alcoholism as a major factor, which I can see, in his criminal behaviour. I just find it scary. What a breakdown. That is quite the breakdown. All of this then takes us up to Sally White's body being discovered in his flat in 2002, and then the discovery of these bodies in December of 2002. The torso that they find in Hardy's bedroom is taken to be identified, and they're wondering, is this the torso of the limbs that they found in the bins earlier? The knives and the hacksaw, they were taken to be examined. The hacksaw had flesh still on it. It's kind of important because they want to link that to all of these, they want to link him to the bin bags. So they are really hoping that there is forensics on the saw that link to the body parts, as well as the torso that they found in his bedroom. They also take a roll of bin liners that they find at the flat and they send that off for forensics as well. And sure enough, the torso is then confirmed to be the same victim as the limbs that they found in the bin. Now, this is spicy, right? The pathologist, when he's looking at this torso, the torso that's found in the flat, he discovers that she's had breast implants. And on those implants are a serial number. And they can trace that back to the clinic, and it's a clinic in Germany. And that serial number, they then trace the identity of the person that got those implants. How clever is that? She was identified as 29-year-old Elizabeth Valad. She began her life in London as a high-class escort, but sadly became addicted to drugs, and then she started working at the red light district in King's Cross. The fingerprints on the hacksaw are a match to Anthony Hardy. Surprise, surprise. And the tissue and the DNA on the hacksaw is a match to Elizabeth and also to the other victim that they found in the bin. So this ties them all together. They put the other DNA sample into the national database, and can you believe it, but it came up with a match. This match was Bridget Mckellen. She was also a sex worker in the area. And this is something out of CSI? Absolutely. The bin liners, the bin bags, would you even think it? I wouldn't think it. That's why I'm not a forensic expert. But they under a microscope, they can match like the little tears, the tiny tears, and like, you know, lines, almost like when they line up a bullet and they can do it on a bullet. They can do that with bin liners. So they did that, and they matched the bin liners that were used to dispose of the bodies to the roll of bin liners that they found in his flat. How amazing. If that wasn't enough, Sainsbury's add another string to the bow. Can you believe it? Sainsbury's is a supermarket here. And they have, like most supermarkets, a loyalty or a club card or whatever. And it's a nectar card at Sainsbury's. They call it that, nectar. They use that, they find it in his flat on the dining room table, and they use that to see what he's been purchasing. And lo and behold, he's got nectar points from the purchase of bin bags. They then look at the date and the time that these bin bags were purchased. Clever. And they find the CCTV footage from Sainsbury's of him buying these bin bags. I just find that fascinating. Who would even think, nectar, yeah, let's have a look at that. Investigators now wanted to prove that Hardy had dismembered the bodies in his flat in the property. So they head to the bathroom because that is a logical place that you would do such a thing, she says, like she knows. And they use the trusty luminol. I'm not going to say, like in other cases, it's like, they walked in and they could just smell bleach. No, in this case, they walked in and they could smell death. So that was not the case. But it wasn't like the bathroom was dripping in blood. It had been cleaned. It just smelled like shit. So they used their trusty luminol, and it lit up like a freaking Christmas tree. There was blood in the bath, on the floor, on the door frame, you name it. They also had a spritz about in the bedroom, and there was a large blood stain, or where there had been a blood stain, on the bedroom floor. For 2 days, so 2 days after the discovery of the victims, Hardy was nowhere to be seen, and the police were desperate to get him quite quickly because the press were now also labelling him the Camden Ripper, and that could have really fed into his ego. And then there was a bit of a break in the case, you see, because the investigators found out, they discovered that Hardy is a diabetic. And he needs insulin, he needs medicine. He would have to go to a doctor's or a hospital and get more. So they sent out information and his photograph to local hospitals, local doctors and pharmacies and things like that, just to say, if this guy comes in, give us a call. Sure enough, shortly after this, UCL Hospital contacted the police to say that they thought he had been in to collect medicine. The police went to the hospital, they looked at the CCTV footage, and it was Hardy. However, I think he had the long coat and the hat on, but he had shaved his beard, so he had made an effort to change his appearance. Although they missed him, they were happy to know that he was still in the North London area. He hadn't completely scarpered and was like in Scotland or something. 24 hours later, on the 2nd of January in 2003, told you it's very quick, this case, an off-duty police officer and his son spot Hardy, and he's at the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. I think maybe trying to get insulin, I'm not sure, but he was there. They call it in, and officers then approach Hardy, who at this point might be feeling quite unwell. However, he puts up quite the fight. He manages to break the eye socket and cheekbone of one of the officers, and he stabs the other one in the hand. Ugh. Yuck. Despite that, they do not let go until backup has come and he's arrested. But yeah, so, fighting for his life, I suppose. He knew what was going to go down. The police now have 24 hours to make something stick, and they need to interview him. And annoyingly, like always, I don't know why I even find it annoying now, because it's always the case. And no comment, the whole way through. But while he is in custody, they get a little bit of information that is, A friend of Hardy's contacts the police to say that before all of this went down, Hardy had given him a receipt for a Photoshop. That's the only, I don't know what they're called. I'm going to call it a Photoshop. You know, you take your negatives from your camera to, because everyone has iPhones, don't they, and phones and stuff, but, you know, not everyone. People do still take photos, Sophie, on a camera. So you take your negative to the shop and they develop it. So a shop for that. And he had this receipt and he gave it to his friend and he said, you look after that, and when all of this is blown over, I will retrieve it and I'll go and collect my photos. Thank you, please. Investigators go to the Photoshop and they retrieve the CCTV footage, because on the receipt it's got like the date and the time that he left his negatives at the shop. So they look at the CCTV and sure enough, it is Anthony Hardy in his long Matrix coat and the Yankees cap, and he is handing over his film to be developed. They also collect the photographs. The people that developed the photos, I mean, what must they have been thinking? The photos show Elizabeth and Bridget laying on the bed, which they know is his bed because it's got that horrible blimmin' devil's mask, and they can see from all items around the bed that it's his flat. And at some point the mask is on one of the victims and this Yankee hat as well. All of these things are just tying him ever more to this case and the fact that he's guilty as sin. There were a lot of pictures of the two women posed together in pornographic poses. A pathologist would look at the photographs and he determined that the women were deceased in the photographs based on how their limbs were and stuff like that. Also, just more cleverness, forensics could link the film, the negative, to the camera found in Hardy's flat. So it was all linked together, tied up in a bow, and Hardy's fingerprints are all over that camera. You know, just, it feels like there's so much evidence against him, doesn't it? And there is, but they just keep layering it on. They were just desperate to get him and make sure they did this right. So they really, really dug deep and made sure they got every piece of evidence they could. At this point, Hardy was then charged with the murder of Elizabeth and Bridget. As they waited for trial, officers just wanted to gather even more evidence, and a woman came forward who'd had an unfortunate encounter with Hardy. She was a sex worker and she'd gone to his property to have sex, and during that act he put all of his body weight, and he was like 6'5" or something like that. He was a big fella and he was big. He put all of his body weight onto her, effectively crushing her. So she couldn't move, she couldn't speak, and she couldn't breathe. After a while, she just couldn't breathe. And she said that when he did that, he just took great pleasure. He really enjoyed seeing her not be able to breathe. This made investigators go back to the death of Sally White. The pathologist reviewed his initial report and then changed his mind. He discovered that Sally White had actually died due to suffocation from extreme pressure. So she was crushed. She was a small person, and Hardy, like I say, was 6'5" and very big, 22 stone. This pathologist was later removed from the medical register. He made another mistake in another case in 2011, I believe, or 2009, and that scares me. That scares me because you just want to have faith and trust in these professionals. And I mean, she had bite marks, scratches and stuff on her face, and she died of a heart attack. Okay. It is believed that Elizabeth and Bridget suffered the same fate as Sally, or that they were strangled. But the ultimate goal for Hardy, his ultimate sexual gratification, came from the photographs and the positioning of their bodies in horrible positions after the event. And when the police came to his property about the battery acid incident, they believe that they interrupted him. He was about to take photographs of Sally White's body. And that just makes me think, if it wasn't for the homeless man finding these horrific body parts in the bin, they would have gone to landfill. They wouldn't have been found. It was a stroke of luck, really, that they were found. So in between February of 2002, when they found Sally White's body in his apartment flat. And then December the 30th of that year, it makes me wonder, could there be more people there, more women that unfortunately ended up in landfill? It's entirely possible, isn't it? The police don't believe that he's only responsible for these 3 murders, Sally, Elizabeth and Bridget. They believe that he is responsible for more. There were some cases that they tried to tie him to. There were 2 bodies of sex workers, or the torsos and body parts of sex workers, found in the Thames, but there was never enough evidence to connect him to those murders and any other murders. But I have a bit of a gut feeling that there were more. Also, the heads and hands of Elizabeth and Bridget were never discovered. Where are they? What happened? It feels really common that the heads of victims and the hands seem to just go unfound. I know that that's the one way of identifying somebody, well, the 2 ways, the heads and the hands, because of teeth and fingerprints. So maybe they're just ultra, I don't know. What do they do with them? But they were never found in this case either. Hardy admitted that he had murdered the 3 women. He pleaded guilty to all 3 murders, and he was given 3 life sentences. And on the 26th of November in 2020, he died in prison from sepsis. I just want to take you back to 2002 when Sally White's body was discovered and Hardy was then placed into a psychiatric facility. He was assessed by a number of psychiatrists, and some of those psychiatrists, most of them, said he was a danger to the community, especially to women. He later told a friend, Hardy, that he tried to trick the psychiatrists because he is cleverer than them. And you scoff at that and think, oh. However, in the November of 2002, despite reports written to say that he was going to be a danger to society, 3 healthcare professionals, managers in their own fields, agreed that he was a minimal threat and they released him. And it was only a month later that the bodies of Elizabeth and Bridget were found. Can you? They deemed him no risk to society. Apparently, the one main report that stated quite clearly how dangerous he was and went into depth about, lots of different things, they didn't get to read that one. It's not like you can just sit with a cup of tea, don't fancy reading that one. What happened? That's angering, isn't it? Sip of gin. On the one hand, the investigation just seemed thorough, nothing seemed to be missed, everything was tied up in a bow, but previously to that, it felt like an absolute shit show, and everything just went wrong. It just slipped through the cracks. It's not the first time that that's happened, is it? It's frustratingly and sadly. It always boggles me. He was in a flat. Apparently, I did read this, I've just remembered because I read it just before, but I read that around the time that, before the bodies were found, because he bought the bin liners 2 weeks before. I think it was 2 weeks. And around that time, in the weeks leading up to the murder, Sophie, is what you mean, his neighbours heard what they thought was drilling at all hours. So probably him, using an electric saw to dismember the bodies. Nice. He was such a menace. I think he was just such a menace in that estate and for his neighbours. Pouring battery acid, and the fact that he did that as well, control yourself, he did that and he had a dead woman in his bedroom. Let's be thankful that these people are not the brightest sparks, but anyway, what a case. For those of you that saw my community post, I had a poorly husband and, my son wasn't poorly, he had an injury. All happened all at once, so I had to deal with that. My son split his nail, I honestly couldn't tell you how, down the middle. Oh, I hate nails as well. I can never have long nails because I'm just so scared of I don't like it and it makes me cringe. And then he did that, he came running in in pure panic. And when he touched it, Anyway, we don't need to get graphic. It's so gross, she says, after she's just talked about true crime and people being chopped to pieces, but still. So I had to deal with this because Paul was up in bed after just vomiting his honesty. I don't know how there was anything left, and he carried on. So that was not pleasant. And so I had to deal with this situation, which normally, if someone else was there, I just would not. But I did. And he was fine. And it's all sort of grown and lovely. And Paul's better now. Thank you, because people were asking. Yeah, he's all better. And I swear, the weather is bipolar. I have worn, in the last week, a t-shirt. I have worn a hoodie and a scarf. We've had cardigan weather. We've had snow. I'm not joking, snow. But then on another day I'm wearing a t-shirt. And rain. And now we're having a gale. You know when it feels almost like, is this real? Is it real? Is there anyone else here but me? Is everything just my imagination? Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I do hope you can join me next week for another true crime story, and a mug or a vase or a goblet or a bowl or a bucket or a hat of gin. And now I can hear my son whistling. I might stay in here. He got a whistle. Why? What is that about? Why give children whistles? I didn't give it to him. I will see you next week. I love you as always. Or is it a bird? Love you lots, and I will see you next week. Bye!